Today's briefing is hosted by the San Luis Obispo Mothers for Peace, Sierra Club California, the California Alliance for Community Energy, and the California Environmental Justice Coalition. Why are we here today? There are some who have been pushing the legislature to extend the life of Diablo Canyon beyond 2030 in this session. It appears that this issue will be left to the next session, but even so, this conversation is going to continue on into the fall, and then it'll start up next year in the next session. And because of that, we wanted to hold the briefing today to provide important information that should inform the fundamental question facing the legislature around this decision, such as what would the continued operation of Diablo Canyon beyond 2030 cost ratepayers and taxpayers? Will Diablo still need to be there for reliability? What are the implications of recent changes in federal regulatory and nuclear regulatory and safety oversight? And what standard of prudence and accountability should California apply before making another long-term commitment to Diablo? And to help answer these questions, we've brought together 4 experts this morning to provide you their insights into these questions. So let me introduce the first speaker. Our first speaker this morning is John Geesman. He's an attorney with Dixon Geesman and a longtime California energy policy expert. He served as the attorney member on the California Energy Commission from 2002 to 2008 and previously as its executive director. He's also chaired the California Power Exchange, served on the California ISO board, and from 2006 to 2011, he served as the co-chair of the American Council on Renewable Energy and is a frequent speaker at national and international policy conferences. So let me hand it off to John to start the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. PG&E is a financial predator. And in 2022, SB 846 invited an unsupervised fox into a henhouse where taxpayers and ratepayers were left unprotected. The Newsom administration and the legislature were outmaneuvered into believing that a $1.4 billion bridge loan from the general fund would be fully offset by a $1.4 billion federal grant. But PG&E now admits that its grant payments will fall short by at least $659 million. And its CEO says taxpayers should absorb that loss. In 2023, the CPUC found that PG&E's cost forecast did not reflect all of the costs associated with Diablo Canyon's extended operations and made a finding that, quote, therefore, it is not an adequate foundation upon which to evaluate the cost effectiveness, prudence, or reasonableness of Diablo Canyon's operations. But in each of the 3 annual proceedings since that finding, the CPUC has refused to conduct any review for cost effectiveness or prudence. Diablo Canyon is what the financial world calls a stranded asset, meaning that the plant persistently falls short of covering its costs with the market revenues it receives for producing electricity. PG&E currently forecasts a $595 million deficit for 2027, bringing the cumulative shortfall to $1.7 billion since extended operations began under SB 846 in November of 2024. This large chasm between operating costs and market revenues has been a long-standing problem at Diablo Canyon, and PG&E management determined in 2016 that the plant should close for economic reasons when the NRC licenses expired in 2024 and 2025. PG&E's 2022 grant application to DOE acknowledged that nearly $2.2 billion in above-market costs had been incurred during the 5 years from 2017 to 2021. Since 2025, when the CPUC corrected its market price benchmark methodology for valuing system reliability, PG&E has reduced its estimate of Diablo Canyon's cumulative capacity value through 2030 by more than 72%, from $5.9 billion dollars down to $1.6 billion. Dollars. Even assuming that this notional non-cash benchmark could be monetized, these reduced capacity benefits are insufficient to offset the large operating revenue shortfalls. In October of 2024, PG&E projected a cumulative net financial benefit from Diablo Canyon's extended operation through 2030 of nearly $4.1 billion. Dollars. Its March 2026 filing calculates a cumulative net financial cost through 2030 of $826 million. That's a $5 billion reversal in 18 months. And PG&E's estimate of net cost does not include the subsidies received from state and federal taxpayers for the plant's extended operation through 2030. Adding those in, the cumulative net financial cost grows to $2.5 billion, dollars, plus whatever interest rate subsidies continue to accrue on the zero interest $1.4 billion loan. PG&E claims that SB 846's extension of Diablo Canyon operation through 2030 will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 34.5 million metric tons, but it doesn't disclose the underlying assumptions about what generation is actually being offset. Accepting PG&E's projection at face value, the $2.5 billion plus cost of achieving it will exceed $71 per metric ton. That's more than twice the recent price in the CARB cap and invest market. Advocates of a further extension to 2045 should explain why Diablo Canyon is different from any other depreciable PG&E asset, where shareholder return is determined exclusively by the capital investments made. Strip away the various financial candy bars that SB 846 coerced from ratepayers and taxpayers, like the hundreds of millions in so-called statutory fees, the $300 million liquidated damages account that indemnifies PG&E for outages, 115% statutory safe harbor for cost overruns. Take those cookies away, pay for Diablo Canyon like we do PG&E's hydroelectric system and every other utility-owned power plant. Would PG&E management choose to go forward on those normal business terms, or would they reaffirm their 2016 financial judgment that the plant has outlived its value? They ought to be required to answer that question.
Thank you, John. And again, for those who've joined late, we'll take questions at the end, and you can always put questions in the chat, and we'll be moderating the chat and pick those questions up at the end. I'm going to turn to our next speaker, and that's Mark Jacobson. Mark is going to actually have a PowerPoint slide here, so you guys will get something to read while you're listening. Mark is a professor of civil and environmental engineering at Stanford University and a senior fellow at the Woods Institute for the Environment. His research, he's an expert, and his research includes modeling electric grid reliability with high levels of renewable energy and developing roadmaps for transitioning energy systems to renewable resources. And so Mark is going to be the next presenter. So Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So hold on a second while I just try to get my screen enlarged. There we go. Yeah, I'm going to talk about just really briefly summarizing why Diablo Canyon slows the energy transition and raises costs. And there's a lot of costs were just discussed. So I'm just going to focus on some different aspects of that. But these are new data, so this is pretty interesting. So up to 90% of Diablo Canyon's monthly output in April and May of 2026, and 29% of its annual output from the last year, which is really from August 1st, 2025 to July 31st, 2026, is actually just wasted because the inflexibility of Diablo Canyon has forced solar and wind to be curtailed by those amounts. So, and I'll show you a graph of that in a second. But just to summarize the other points here, this wastefulness is going to increase every year. So in the last year it was 29% of its annual amount. The year before it was 19%. So next year it could be up to like 35 to 39% of the output is wasted. There's 3.2 billion in subsidies just to pay for this additional waste and in kind of minor amounts of energy. It directly increases California's electricity prices, hogs the transmission line to the Central Coast, reducing offshore wind prospects. It matches demand seasonally worse than wind, water, and solar, as I'll show you with data that clean renewable energy actually matches seasonal demand better than a constant flat power that's down 50% for 1 to 2 months a year. And people claim, well, if it's closed, it'll be replaced by gas, and that's actually not true. Gas is being eliminated from California's grid really rapidly, and it'll be replaced by clean renewable energy. That's all that's in the queue right now. So let me just show you the data. So here's Diablo Canyon's its output, exact output monthly from January 24 to July 26 in the purple line. And then when it goes down, that's because one of the two plants reactors is down for maintenance. And the green is the curtailment of wind and solar. And it's it's all because of Diablo Canyon that this is curtailed. If Diablo Canyon were not there, that green would be produced by wind and solar. It's wind and solar is actually shut down because we have like especially during spring, every day during spring, clean renewable energy meets over 100% of the demand in California for up to 10 hours a day and up to 164% of demand. And so Diablo Canyon is another 10% of demand at those times. And so when you have the first thing that happens when you have extra wind or solar over demand is it goes into batteries. And when the batteries are full, some go to exports. But the states that take imports from California, they also have a lot of renewables occurring at midday. And so they don't need a lot of imports. And so the excess over that gets curtailed. And so Diablo Canyon can't ramp down, so it forces wind and solar, which can go down and prevents their production. And this, and so it's a one-to-one correlation. In fact, you can see in 2025, March and April of 2025, when one of the reactors of Diablo Canyon was down, the curtailment was a little bit lower. And then March and April of 2026, when those reactors were not down, suddenly the curtailment just jumped up. And it's a one-to-one correlation. Diablo Canyon is forcing wind and solar off the grid. So you're just paying for wasted electricity. So for example, there are $3.2 billion in subsidies so far to Diablo Canyon, at least in the last, since I think 2024. And those include $1.1 billion in federal subsidies to make up the difference between its high cost to run and its revenues. 720 million is tacked on to ratepayer bills. So that's a direct increase of everybody's electricity price in California, including those not in PG&E territory. And then there's $1.4 billion in state loans to keep Diablo to keep it afloat till 2030, and up to 600 million may never be repaid. And just to give you an indication that the curtailment will increase each year, because this is what's on the queue in terms of, well, this is what we currently have in terms of wind and solar: 24 gigawatts of solar PV utility scale, 12.3 gigawatts of wind, including the New Mexico that's coming in, wind coming from New Mexico, and 17.1 gigawatts of batteries. This is on the CAISO grid. This is what's on the queue: 17 gigawatts of PV, almost a gigawatt of wind, and 11 gigawatts of mostly batteries, but no gigawatts of anything else. And that means that as we're adding more wind and solar, we're going to see more curtailment over time. And so we already have 29%. Next year is probably going to go up to somewhere between 35 and 39%. What about electricity prices? How is nuclear affecting the electricity prices? Well, first of all, this shows all states in the US electricity price versus penetration of clean renewable energy: wind, water, and solar. South Dakota has the highest penetration as a percent of demand. It's now 126% of its demand in the yearly average is met by just wind, water, solar, mostly wind. But it's a weak correlation, but it is a negative correlation. The more wind, water, solar, the lower the electricity price in the state. Now, California has a high retail electricity price for other reasons, nothing to do with the renewables, has to do with like wildfires being passed on to customers, the nuclear, high gas prices, transmission upgrade needs, and also the fact that the Aliso Canyon and San Bruno gas disasters are still that contributed to high prices as well. But this is not just a US thing. This is worldwide. More wind, water, solar, lower electricity prices. Well, how does nuclear and fossil fuels affect electricity prices? This is worldwide, every country, every territory in the world. More fossil fuels, higher electricity prices. More nuclear, higher electricity prices. So the correlation, even though they're all relatively weak correlations, the direction is clear that renewables decrease electricity prices, fossil fuels and nuclear increase prices on grids. What about, I mentioned how clean renewable energy matches demand better in California than Diablo Canyon. So here's the evidence. Here are the 4 years of data. The left is, well, the red line is demand, and there's 2023, 24, 25, and 26. The on the left is clean renewable energy, and you'll notice it peaks in the summer, and demand peaks in the summer too, a little bit later. Clean renewable energy, mostly due to solar, peaks in kind of in June, the early summer, and a little bit in July, and then demand peaks in kind of August, September. But it's like there's a little bit of matching. But on the right is nuclear. Well, just for the pink, and you can see it's flat. Doesn't meet any seasonal demand. It's just a flat, and then it's sometimes down like 2 or 3 times a year. It's down for maintenance for some of the reactors. So the point is, clean renewable energy actually just meets demand better and matches seasonally better than nuclear. So the claim that, well, baseload nuclear is helpful, it doesn't. Even in winter, there's 5 times the wind, water, solar output in California in winter in December than there is nuclear. So all we have to do is increase clean renewable energy, and that all the curves on the left just rise until they meet the demand. They'll go over the demand as well. And that's why we have batteries to shift time. Point is, baseload doesn't mean anything. It's useless. It's not meeting demand. You still need backup. And renewables are actually matching demand better seasonally. And then if the other argument that, well, if we shut Diablo Canyon, we'll use gas, that's not true. Gas, as you can see, is down 55% since 2023. Renewables are going up. Imports are up too, but imports are about 58% wind, water, and solar. As I showed on the queue in California, all we have is wind or solar, a little bit of wind and batteries. That's what's going to replace Diablo Canyon. It's not gas, because gas is down 55%. It's been forced out by a lot of solar and batteries in California. And that's all I have to say. Thanks very much. And I will stop sharing.
All right, thank you, Mark. And I've already noted one question, so we'll get to that at the end. Our next speaker is Dr. Ed Lyman. Dr. Lyman is a director of nuclear power safety at the Union of Concerned Scientists and a physicist who's been with UCS since 2003. He's an internationally recognized expert on nuclear power safety and security, nuclear proliferation, and nuclear terrorism, and has testified many times before Congress and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So, Ed?
Thank you. How's my sound? Good? Okay. So thank you for inviting me to this briefing. I'm calling in from Washington, D.C., where UCS has been a watchdog of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for many decades. And although we have had concerns for a long time about the independence of the NRC and its effectiveness as a regulator, what has happened in the last year or so is truly remarkable in terms of the NRC's history. And so since SB 846 was passed, I think that that bill explicitly gave its proxy to the NRC as a safety regulator that would ensure the safe and secure operation of Diablo Canyon into the extended license period. But however you felt about the NRC's effectiveness at that point, your assumptions really need to change because since President Trump issued Executive Order 14300 in May of 2025, ordering the reform, that's quote unquote, of the NRC, it has ceased to function even, even with the appearance of being an independent regulator. And it is explicitly now under the full control of the White House and its political operation. And that was not only the result of the executive order, which the NRC took to heart and is busy rewriting all its regulations to meet that executive order, but also the Supreme Court decision in Trump v. Slaughter, which affected the NRC as well as all other formerly independent agencies by allowing the president to fire commissioners at will. The That retroactively legalized the firing of Chairman Christopher Hansen, who I believe was a strong safety advocate last year, and it imperils the jobs of all the other commissioners, making it virtually impossible for them to defy the White House and expect to keep their jobs. So without that independence, it's hard to see how the NRC is going to be able to maintain its role as protecting public health and safety and the environment of California and every other state. So every state, California included, that has operating nuclear power plants needs to understand that they can no longer rely on the federal agency, the NRC, to protect public health, safety, and the environment. Yet the states themselves have very little recourse to impose their own restrictions given federal preemption on safety issues. So with regard to Diablo Canyon specifically, we've long been concerned about the unresolved seismic risks of the plant. Most recently, the NRC's reevaluation of seismic hazards following the Fukushima Daiichi disaster in 2011 did find that the plant's seismic design basis was not as severe as its reevaluated hazard, so there's a gap. Yet the NRC did not require any seismic upgrades, and this was pre-Trump NRC. This was the original battled NRC, but things are even worse today. So the prospect that that decision may be changed in the future and that the NRC would take action to address those seismic risks is even more remote. And those include, for instance, the lack of reliability of the emergency response equipment that the NRC had required all reactors to install or to acquire after the Fukushima accident. The NRC did not require that equipment to be as reliable as it should be, so that there are real questions about whether it would survive a severe seismic event, Diablo Canyon, be usable to prevent the plant from having a meltdown. Another issue is the continued storage of spent nuclear fuel in overstuffed wet pools, something that our organization has been concerned about for many years. There's a simple solution to reduce that risk. That is the risk, let's say, that a large earthquake would cause the pool liner to crack, the water leak out, the fuel to overheat and burn. If you transfer more of that spent fuel into dry casks, you could reduce the risk should a large earthquake occur at Diablo Canyon. The NRC never imposed a requirement that those spent fuel pools be thinned out, despite what was seen at Fukushima Daiichi, where one of the spent fuel pools came very close to having exactly that disaster occur. And any hope that in the future the NRC will course correct and make changes is, again, even less likely now, given the end of the NRC as an independent agency. In terms of what's happening right now on the ground, in response to the executive order, the NRC has already slashed many of its safety and security inspection programs by 50% or more. And this includes aging management inspections, which of course are part of the key bargain when a nuclear plant license is renewed, that there's robust requirements and inspections of the aging plant to ensure that you can operate an older plant like Diablo Canyon safely. Those inspections are going to go down, or they already have been. And you may say, well, that could be a financial benefit for the state because fewer inspections means lower cost for PG&E, but in fact, that's penny wise and pound foolish, because if you reduce aging management inspections, increasing the risk of reliability issues that are not caught until they're too late. It will presumably lead to more downtime for the plant and more expense to repair. Another critical security program that's being cut are the force-on-force inspections that were mandated by Congress after the 9/11 attacks, yet the NRC, I believe, is illegally eliminating those NRC-led force-on-force inspections. These are security inspections using mock terrorist forces to show that the security force at plants like Diablo Canyon can prevent a terrorist attack from causing a meltdown. Those inspections are going away. And finally, the NRC is rewriting its rules for oversight of operating plants like Diablo Canyon that, if they're promulgated, if they're approved, would allow a licensee like PG&E to completely eliminate their security force altogether, putting the full burden of response in the event of a terrorist attack at Diablo Canyon on local law enforcement. And this is an unfunded mandate, which essentially transfers that burden from the licensee to overburden local law enforcement and other state and local authorities. No money for that. In addition, other changes could be the utilities would be allowed to pursue the elimination of their offsite emergency planning. That's both the ingestion planning zone, which is currently 50 miles around Diablo Canyon, as well as the emergency evacuation or other response activities within 10 miles to protect people from a radioactive plume given an accident. In the case of the latter, state, local, and tribal entities would have to also sign off on the elimination of the emergency planning zone, which I don't expect would occur in California, but who knows what the future may bring. But the ingestion planning would be removed completely, and that would, although a lot of the burden for meeting those responsibilities is already on the state, it would absolve PG&E of any responsibility for coping with the potential contamination of agricultural lands, water resources, and other ways in which radiation escaping from the plant could enter the food and water supply. So those are just a handful of my concerns about this reduction in federal oversight that Californians need to understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. That's sobering. So I'm going to move on to our final speaker, and that's Peter Bradford. Peter teaches and advises on utility regulation, nuclear power, and energy policy in the U.S. and overseas. He's a former member of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission and chair of both the New York Public Service Commission and the Maine Public Utilities Commission. He's taught at the Yale School of the Environment and at Vermont Law School. And he represents Vermont on the Texas-Vermont Low-Level Radioactive Waste Compact Commission. And he's an author of the book Fragile Structures, a story of oil refineries, national security, and the coast of Maine, as well as many other articles. So Peter, you're going to take us home, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thanks, Kim. How's my audio? So other speakers today have explained why decisions to continue to operate Diablo Canyon past 2030 would impose unnecessary costs, would undermine California's climate goals, and would entail unacceptable risks. I'll explain why these impacts are exacerbated by the sometimes reckless way in which California is making decisions as to Diablo Canyon life extension. Unless more careful practices guide future decision-making, the results will further harm California customers, its taxpayers, and its climate goals. Prudence has been a crucial customer protection term in utility regulation for the last 100 years. The requirement that customers not pay for imprudently incurred costs is the ultimate safeguard against imposition of costs that have not been adequately evaluated or controlled. It has long been a fundamental component of California's legal requirement that utility rates be just and reasonable. In enacting SB 846 in 2022, the legislature expressly relied on and instructed the PUC and other executive branch agencies to evaluate the prudence of operation of Diablo Canyon for 5 years after the previously approved 2025 complete shutdown date. This was a sensible and fundamental precaution, especially given that the legislature itself had lacked the time for extensive hearings and investigations that such a multi-billion-dollar commitment of customer and taxpayer money would normally compel. Such an evaluation would have had to include thorough assessment of the costs, risks, and benefits of extended operation, and also of alternatives to continued operation. Where feasible, this evaluation would have included the use of competitive procurement to discover just what resources were available in what timeframes and at what costs, and with what impacts on California's climate and other environmental goals. Uncertainties, which are always particularly large in the case of nuclear power, as to costs, safety requirements, funding sources, and exogenous events, would have been taken into account. So also would such a process have evaluated the impacts of continued operation of Diablo Canyon in suppressing the development and the operation of alternative low-income and zero-carbon resources, including energy efficiency, load management, and grid enhancements, all of which have proven more economical than continued operation of aging reactors when tested through competitive processes in other states. Despite the clear requirements of SB 846, no such thorough evaluation of the prudence of extending Diablo Canyon operation to 2030 has been done. Meanwhile, Diablo cost estimates and rate impacts have risen, as nuclear projects always do. California's ability to achieve reliability without Diablo Canyon has become even more robust, and expensive financing uncertainties have manifested themselves. California's electricity costs have risen at rates well above inflation, making affordability a major power supply concern, even though much of the financing risk falls not on California customers, but on California taxpayers. Even with these loud alarms ringing, no prudence review has occurred. Of course, the operation of Diablo Canyon beyond 2030, all the way to 2045, makes a thorough review of the prudence of all aspects of this decision even more essential. The legislature should not again be put in the position of needing to make late-night up or down decisions on so crucial and complex a matter. Among the necessary ingredients of such a review are a thorough and transparent assessment of all the alternatives through both analytical and market processes, a clear assessment of the customer and climate impacts of the alternatives, including the uncertainties, and an assessment of customer and taxpayer protection measures that need to be imposed as preconditions. You can be absolutely sure that these analyses have been done when assessing the risks to investors and to stockholders. The failure to use California ISO and other competitive procurement processes to ascertain the lowest cost combination of resources is particularly dismaying because the development of sophisticated power markets in the 1990s was so much a product of California's experience with nuclear cost overruns, especially at Diablo Canyon, and with project cancellations in the 1970s and 1980s. It was during the 1990s and thereafter that California developed its sophisticated power markets, precisely so that generation resources would be chosen on the basis of full information and equitable allocation of risks and rewards, rather than the historic mixture of well-intentioned prophecy and political expediency, processes through which the answers seemed always to be, we can't achieve our goals without embracing more nuclear, only to learn in hindsight that there had always been ample and less expensive ways to the same societal ends. These protection measures might well include cost caps, requirements for competitive procurement, open to all supply and demand side resources, and explicit analysis of the uncertainties associated with the various potential courses of action. Consideration of these is fundamental to prudent decision-making as to matters with the economic and safety concerns of extending the operation of Diablo Canyon reactors. The proponents of such an extension are experienced electric generation decision makers. If they really believe that what they tell the legislature and the public about the benefits of Diablo Canyon extension, they would be at the head of the line of those demanding a prudent and transparent and thorough evaluative process. Instead, they've repeatedly discouraged and failed to perform such an ongoing evaluation of Diablo Canyon and the alternatives. This silence, even in the face of the legislature's clear 2022 mandate, speaks volumes as to what they expect the outcome to be. I don't know that something close to a blank check for Diablo Canyon would not emerge from such a prudence review as the preferable option. However, experience in other states and California's Diablo experience to date makes this seem very, very unlikely. Now's the time to establish a genuinely prudent process that will spare the legislature and others from having to make hugely consequential decisions on a crisis basis with severely limited information. That's the path that the legislators should insist on now.
Thank you, Peter. So I just want to say thank you to the presenters. This has all been really good information, and I hope that it has, I can see the folks who are on this in the Zoom boxes, and we've got a lot of staff here who are very well versed, I think, in the energy issues and have probably already seen a lot of presentations on Diablo. So I'm hoping that this has generated an opportunity for folks to ask questions here.